Welcome back to We Want Picks. I'm Artem MMA, and I'm going to be breaking down the Contender Series for the 2024 season on the We Want Picks channel, and I'm very much looking forward to it, and especially looking forward to this season in particular, because I do believe that this season probably is the best season that we have seen so far in terms of overall talent spread throughout the entire card. And honestly, just can't really wait to get into it. I think it's going to be great fun. If you haven't heard of it before or haven't seen it before, Dana White's Contender Series is an opportunity for fighters to earn their way into the UFC by winning one fight in front of Dana White and the matchmakers. It is on every single Tuesday night for the next 10 weeks and will be broadcast on ESPN Plus and also, I believe, UFC Fight Pass as well. Week number one's interesting as we do have a couple of short notice fights, but nonetheless, I am still going to very much be looking forward to it. Of course, every single week I will be writing my article very early, and with that is going to be on the WeWantPicks.com website, which is $10 per month for the premium membership there. With that, you do get access to everything that I do in the terms of articles outside of the UFC. I break down the PFL, LFA, and also the Contender Series as well for the next 10 weeks, so we'll be writing my articles up and putting them up early every single event and every single week. And of course, you get access to Angelo and Jacob's bets as well. With all of that being said, now let's get into my predictions for week number one of the Contender Series. So kicking off the week one card and also the entire season are two young up-and-coming flyweights that are very much UFC ready and are very much great prospects to keep your eye out for, and I'm very much looking forward to watching this fight. It is Antoine Ho fighting against Lona Kavanagh in what should be a very good technical flyweight bout that, in my opinion, is going to go all 15 minutes. Antoine Ho is a very fast striker that does mix in his grappling quite well, whereas with Lona Kavanagh, I feel like he is much more of a primary striker, and you don't necessarily see him mix in too much offensive grappling in his game, but he does have very good takedown defense. I think that Lona Kavanagh, out of these two, is actually going to be the fastest striker, and also I think he is the more polished striker. I do understand that a lot of people have been saying that he has been working on his grappling and his ground game, but I do feel like just from what I've seen so far, I do think that I would have to give an advantage in the grappling to Antoine Ho. Both guys are very, very fast for the weight class. I think that both guys are very much probably going to put on a war for 15 minutes, but I am going to side with Lona Kavanagh in this fight. I do think that he's going to be able to keep the fight on the feet and able to use his boxing. He's got a very nice counter boxing. I think that was mostly showcased actually in his more recent fight where he took the toughest opponent of his career in Sean Marcos da Silva, was able to hurt Sean Marcos da Silva in the first round and then just kind of took over from there, and really, in my opinion, in that fight showcased how good he can be in his striking. Antoine Ho has been fighting for the LFA and of course it does train in the USA as well, whereas Lona Kavanagh trains in the Europe and in the UK. Antoine Ho does mix in his grappling with his striking a little bit more. He does have a good win over the wrestler Mikheil Sanson, but before that has had an undefeated amateur career. So he is undefeated as an amateur and a professional, but as I did state before, I think it is going to be Lona Kavanagh here. I do think that he is the fastest striker. Some people may disagree with me on that, but I think that it's going to be that technical, crispy counterboxing. Now, where the fight does get very interesting is, in my opinion, the odds are just way too wide for this one. Lona Kavanagh is minus 250 right now, minus 240 on some sports books, and Antoine Ho is about plus 195, plus 175, all the way to plus 200. I do think that's a little bit wide. I actually think that this fight is significantly closer than that. And with the Contender Series underdogs, I think won more often than not last year. So if you really want to get on a good underdog, Antoine Ho could be that. But my pick and prediction is Lona Kavanagh to win in a 15-minute decision. And I do think that this is going to be a fantastic fight to kick off the card. And now we have Meng fighting against Rami Hamid, and if you guys were unaware, this is actually a very short notice replacement fight where Rami Hamid, to my understanding, actually only accepted this fight a couple of days ago, so that is going to be less than 1 week's notice for Rami Hamid if he did accept the fight when I found out about it. What was originally meant to happen was Meng was going to fight against Islam Dulatov. Islam Dulatov has now been rescheduled to a later date, and in my opinion, that was a much more difficult fight for Meng than what Rami Hamid is going to be. Meng is a fighter that I am a fan of. I have been very impressed by him, especially very recently. I do think that his most recent fight is actually his best performance, which you do like to see. It tells me that he has been improving in his game. He, I believe, lost 3 times to Kavanagh in a trilogy, lost all 3 of those fights, but then was given a 4th fight on a JCK card, which can be watched on UFC Fight Pass. And he was able to get that win. And in that fight, he looked very good. He showed very good defensive grappling, which he did struggle with in the past against that same opponent. And on the feet, it was very clearly a Meng fight. He was very much clearly the better striker and the more comfortable striker. And more so importantly, he is absolutely massive, 170 pounds. He's listed at 6'2", but he's a big 6'2". And if you do look through his career, of course, there is some very obvious standouts. The fact that he hasn't really fought the best competition, but he does have a couple of good wins and a couple of wins that can be found very easily. His win over Arajali, who was 4-0 at the time, and Tayalaki Niraji, who was 6-0 at the time, but has now gone on to actually prove to be a very dangerous opponent in his own right, winning over Hunseol Kim on the road to UFC. Meng is a kickboxer. He has a professional kickboxing background. He's very active in his career with 42 professional fights, and I do believe that he is going to be the better striker in this one here against Rami. Rami is very hard to track down, as he has been very inactive in his career recently. He did fight a year and 7 months ago, but before that hadn't fought for a few months, and these weren't really against the best competition. And then before that, took about a year off against Elias Santos, fights that can be found on YouTube for Titan FC. But he was meant to be on the Contender Series last year against Raymond Magomedaliev, who did end up losing his fight to Mauricio Rufy, who a lot of people probably know about. Rami is very, very hard to track down because, in my opinion, you learn absolutely nothing out of his 2 most recent fights against Julio Diaz and Jimmy Alberto Diaz Zelita. I was able to watch these fights, and they both kind of just go the same way, where Rami defends takedowns and lands leg kicks, and eventually the opponents quit to leg kicks. Like his opponent here, Jimmy Alberto, he took a big leg kick like 10 seconds into the fight. It obviously affected him. And then when the fight was finished, he took another big leg kick and he just sat down and just refused to fight. Very, very odd. So you can't really learn too much. And then against Elias Santos, who has gone on to actually make a bit of a career from himself after starting 2-4 in his career. In that one, we saw Rami have to defend a lot of takedowns, but there were a lot of moments where Hamid is standing in the middle of the cage with his hands pretty low and doing absolutely nothing. And I think that in moments like that, Meng is going to be able to pressure forward, use his reach advantage, which he does have by a few inches, and kind of piece apart Rami from range. And I do think eventually he's going to land something big. Maybe we could see Rami offensively wrestle. We haven't seen him do it in 3 years. We haven't really seen him have a real fight that has lasted longer than a minute and a half in 3 years. I do have to go with Meng. I think that he does have potential to make something happen in the UFC if he does avoid fighting wrestlers. He's a very talented striker. That grappling is a big kind of low point in his game. But the odds for this one is Meng against Rami is minus 225. Meng right now is minus 200 on DraftKings. The odds are all over the place as the fight was most recently announced, but I think minus 200 does make sense, even though he was opening at plus 200, so odds could be all over the place for Meng, but I do think he wins, and the majority of Tapology do think he wins as well. I do think he is the more technical striker, I think he's the higher volume striker, and that's why I do like him in the fight. Jose Delgado is another very short notice replacement fight, and this is in my opinion, better fight for Ernie Juarez than the original opponent was. Jose Delgado is absolutely massive, 145 pounds, and I think you do need to potentially consider that when you do look at this matchup, because Jose Delgado, to my understanding, only accepted this fight, I want to say, maybe about a week ago, so I'd say Delgado's potentially had maybe 1.5 to 2 weeks to prepare for this short notice opportunity against Ernie Juarez. But looking at the tape, Jose Delgado has actually impressed me quite a bit. As I did say, he's 5'11", he's a massive featherweight, and he does use that size very well. On the feet, he's got a very, very odd, loose style where he does actually have his hands very low down to the ground, and then he kind of moves in a very free-flowing state. It is an interesting sort of style, but the more most impressed that I would say that I probably was actually with Jose Delgado's wrestling. I would like to see Jose Delgado actually go into this fight and wrestle. And as I did say with Jose Delgado's interesting striking style, it has got him caught in the past. Alberto Romo dropped him pretty badly in the first round in that fight, but Jose Delgado was actually able to reverse the position when Romo got on top to finish the fight, was able to get the takedown and get on top and survived the first round, and then of course did eventually win the fight with his striking. He got a knockout at the start of round number 3. But you don't really like seeing that. You don't like seeing Jose Delgado go out there and get dropped by other opponents, and in my opinion, a less opponent than his opponent now in Ernie Juarez. But one thing that I do know about Jose Delgado is that he does have a lot of danger to present on the feet and also will be willing to wrestle as well. Ernie Juarez is an interesting fighter. I did think that his last opponent was going to be a pretty tough one for him in Akaro Brito, just because Akaro Brito, in my opinion, was a much faster striker in general with much better footwork than Jose Delgado. And Ernie Juarez is a decent striker, but I do actually think that the best parts of his game are with his pure grappling, but he doesn't necessarily shoot for as much takedowns as I would personally like to see him do. He is, of course, undefeated in his career, has found a lot of success for Uriah Faber's A1 Combat, which is actually a promotion I'm a big fan of. I believe they had a Teruto Ishihara fight on their first ever event, which was quite awesome. But yeah, undefeated as an amateur and then undefeated as a professional MMA fighter as well. He does find most of his success, in my opinion, with the grappling, but he can use that striking as well. I'm not very confident in this one because, once again, I think that the odds are just a little bit wide. I mean, they are very wide. Jose Delgado's coming in on short notice, on about a week's notice, and it's minus 250 in this matchup, whereas Ernie Juarez, you can get him at plus 175. The reason why I am still going to pick Jose Delgado in this one, though, is because I have seen Ernie Juarez struggle to get the takedowns before, and I do believe that Delgado, using his wrestling and his size, will be able to defend the takedowns and will just ultimately be able to potentially get his own offensive takedowns and maybe get his striking going as well. I believe that Delgado is not the pick at all on Tapology, so although he is a big favorite with the odds, he is the underdog in the community predictions there on the Tapology website. Now we can move up to a returning fighter in Bruno Lopes fighting against Mikheil Sazhiniani. Bruno Lopes, I've never been more embarrassed by a single... Actually, no, never mind. Kevin Szavlasky was probably number 1, but Bruno Lopes is a very, very close number 2, because Bruno Lopes, prior to that Contender Series fight against Brenton Ribeiro, he looks amazing. He looks incredibly good. He's going out there, he's finishing opponents, and finishing decent opponents at that as well in the LFA, mixing and striking, mixing and grappling. He's looking like he could be a real prospect at 205 pounds. And then he gets exposed, and he did get exposed by Brenton Ribeiro in that fight. He got exposed as being a slow striker. He got exposed for being a guy that can get sucked into a brawl. He got exposed for being a guy that can get in the pocket and will stay in the pocket for far too long and will just get caught, and that's going to be a problem against Mikheil Sazhiniani. The point is, Lopes is a lot more flawed than initially we did see in his previous fights, because he was just dominating everybody. But he did bounce back against a win over Marcus Brigagal, who isn't just a guy that you can run over, and although he did still struggle somewhat in that fight and still looked slow and still showed flaws, he was able to get it done using his wrestling and grappling, and he did obviously find that submission win, and he's found his way back. And I've given you all of those red flags again about Bruno Lopes, and I'm still going to pick him to beat Mikheil Sazhiniani anyway. The best thing that I can say about Mikheil Sazhiniani is that, my goodness, I probably had the most fun watching tape on this guy than I probably have out of many people. I mean, it is pretty hard to find a lot of his fights. You do have to find them on YouTube for the most part, but overall, it can be a little bit of a mission to find them. The fight against Mirzaza Talha was pretty easy to find. I believe it's just on Fight Pass. No, it's just on YouTube, because Brave has a YouTube channel. But nonetheless, Mikheil Sazhiniani is a very fun striker. He's pretty small for 205, in my opinion, but what he likes to do is pressure forward and throws in combinations. This guy just explodes, you know, he doesn't really just fight from range and throws 1, 2 strikes at one time. if he's going to go, he's going to throw 3 or 4 strikes at once. And you might like that style against someone like Bruno Lopes, because I just said Bruno Lopes can get sucked into a brawl. Bruno Lopes is a slow striker. Bruno Lopes is a guy that's going to find himself in the pocket and will stay in the pocket for far too long. And maybe that combination striking explosive style of Sazhiniani could work. But I do still have issues with the wrestling. Murtaza Talha did finish him on the ground relatively easily, and we saw him look pretty bad on the Contender Series last year. Even though he was injured, he still didn't look that good. The level of competition isn't great. I mean, this Abdullah guy, I actually did think that he looked pretty decent, and Mikheil Sazhiniani was able to defensively wrestle and even offensively wrestle in moments in that fight, so maybe that's something that you could see in this fight. We know that Mikheil Sazhiniani can defend takedowns, we know that he can get takedowns, and he ultimately did finish Abdullah Asayev, and I do think that that actually was a pretty decent opponent, and it's definitely the best opponent that he has beaten in his career. But I'm still just gonna trust Bruno Lopes. I don't feel good about it, but Bruno Lopes is going to be the bigger fighter out of the two. Bruno Lopes, in my opinion, has the better pure grappling out of the two, and I do think that if Bruno Lopes comes in there with a smart game plan, he can pressure Sazhiniani backwards, which we haven't seen happen to Sazhiniani before, really, and get the takedown, and then just kind of control the fight on top, and maybe find a submission at some point in the fight. Seems like the majority agree. Bruno Lopes is minus 200. As I did say before, Bruno Lopes, I believe, was like minus 600 on the Contender Series last year, and he burned a lot of people, including myself, by getting knocked out by Brenton Ribeiro, who hasn't won a fight in the UFC yet. He was minus 600. So definitely, in my opinion, it's light heavyweights. Just stay away from this one. The under probably won't even be good value, but I do think that someone's getting a finish, whether it is Sazhiniani getting the knockout or Bruno Lopes finding the submission win. Now this fight is interesting because the odds have flipped significantly when they first dropped. Mansur Abdul-Malik is my pick to win the main event and the first main event of the 2024 Contender Series season, but Wes Scultz actually opened as the favourite. Now, to be fair, the line was minus 120 Wes Scultz and minus 110 Mansur Abdul-Malik, so that is a pick'em fight. However, it still did give Wes Scultz a slight advantage, and now that line has been bet down unbelievably. Mansur Abdul-Malik is minus 400, and Wes Scultz is plus 275. Wes Scultz, the odds makers, you know, the experts that create these odds, gave Wes Scultz the favourite, and although I am going to pick Mansur Abdul-Malik, I can actually sell you on a way that Wes Scultz does win the fight, and that's just survive the first round. I do think it probably is as simple as that, because we have seen fighters like Mansur Abdul-Malik fight before, and we have seen them thrive. You know, I kind of think of someone like Zachary Reese, who looked incredible against Eli Aronov, did lose to Brundage, but looked great again, got another 20-second KO. The thing about Mansur Abdul-Malik, in my opinion, that I think is so good about him, but is also a little bit of a red flag, is the fact that he has never been to the second round in his entire career. In fact, he's never been to the third minute in his entire career outside of his debut. And in that debut, he did find some issues. You know, that Cole Jordan opponent that he did have did hurt him on the feet in moments, but of course, eventually he was able to get it done. Mansur Abdul-Malik, if you guys are unfamiliar with him, is, as you can imagine, an incredibly powerful guy. He's got so many wins in the first round, a lot of them by TKO. A lot of them are absolutely brutal as well. This Alan St. Goliath opponent was, I believe, like 6'5" or something along those lines. He was so much taller than him. Mansur Abdul-Malik took him down and knocked him out very, very badly, and that's what he's going to want to do against Wes Scultz. Wes Scultz, I think, will have the better cardio because we've seen him go 3 hard rounds before, but I think that there are still red flags there. He's also a wrestler, so it's a wrestler versus wrestler matchup, and the thing about Wes Scultz is I did see him get out-wrestled in a fight against Dylan Budka, who struggled to take down Cesar Almeida in the UFC, you know? So the takedown defense doesn't really look like it could be there, and in moments, he pulled guard against Dylan Budka. You cannot do that against Mansur Abdul-Malik. I'll tell you what Mansur Abdul-Malik does. He takes you down, and he just rains ground and pound, man. That's exactly what he did to Alan St. Goliath. It's exactly what he did to Donale Benedetto. He will take you down, and he will just land some of the most brutal ground and pound that, honestly, I've ever seen. But there is a little bit of problem though, because he is a very, very fast starter. He's 125% in everything that he does. He's going to use all of his energy to get that takedown and try and find the knockout. But what happens if he doesn't get the knockout in the first round and where Scultz is there for the second round and the third round? Kind of think of how Trevor Peek won his fight on the Contender Series. He was getting beaten up for the first round badly, but he came back because he had the better cardio. Maybe where Scultz can do that, but Mansur Abdul-Malik minus 400 I think is a little bit wide. The way that I see this fight going is Mansur Abdul-Malik finds the win in the first round by knockout, or where Scultz is able to survive and then take over in the second and the third round and kind of out-wrestle a potentially gassed out Mansur Abdul-Malik. But what if Mansur Abdul-Malik has 3-round cardio? I do think Wes Scultz will be in trouble. I don't like the fact that I've seen Wes Scultz out-wrestled before, and I do think that we are going to see Mansur Abdul-Malik, I apologize, find his win in the Contender Series, and with a knockout, he will probably get signed to the promotion. So that is my picks. Unfortunately, of course, it is 5 favorites, but there are definitely some underdog picks coming up, and I do want to emphasize as well, underdogs win on the Contender Series. You know, there are really some realistic paths, in my opinion, for big underdogs like Tuan, like Mikheil Sazhiniani, and Wes Scultz in this matchup. And as well, of course, I did say that I think that Jose Delgado and Ernie Juarez is a bit wide, and if Ernie Juarez can get that wrestling going, maybe we can see Ernie Juarez find a submission or something along those lines like that. But of course, as I did say before, I have picked all 5 favorites for this card. It's going to be a good one though. I think this is one of the better cards of the entire season. I think it's going to be a great one. Let me know what you think of this card. Let me know your picks as well in the comment section below. And of course, I'll see you guys in the next one.